Right now, your mind may be humming with the persistent, low-level static of a performance that never truly ends. A constant internal tempo that keeps you rushing to hit the next note before the previous one has even faded. You are sitting in the echoing pavilion of your own awareness, feeling the pressure to keep the rhythm steady, fearing that if you ever stop to draw breath, the entire melody of your life might simply collapse into silence. The air in this imaginary space is cool, smelling faintly of mountain rain on aged, unvarnished cedar, and the shadows are lengthening across the floorboards in time with the slow, inevitable dimming of the day. You do not need to play a single note tonight. You only need to hear the resonance of the room as it waits for you to stop trying to conduct the wind. You are not broken because you feel this frantic internal hum, this sense that you are failing to maintain the tempo in a world that demands a relentless, high-speed composition. What you are experiencing is not a failure of talent. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the musician's purpose. Tonight, we will not force the mind to stop moving, nor will we try to freeze the tempo into a rigid, breathless state that doesn't exist. Instead, we will look at why you have been trying to outplay the wind, and we will learn how to value the silence between your efforts as much as you value the performance itself. If it feels right, take a slow, unhurried breath, letting it expand your chest like the gentle vibration of a tuning fork striking the air. You are safe enough to soften. You do not have to compose the rest of your life tonight. Nothing is required of you, and there is no audience you are expected to impress before the morning. The paradox of the musician is this: you believe that the value of your music lies only in the notes you play. But in truth, the beauty of the composition is found in the rests, the quiet spaces that allow the melody to exist. You fear that if you allow the tempo to slacken, if you allow the silence to enter your day without trying to fill it with another task or another anxious thought, you will lose your way. Yet the Buddhist insight is quite different. The silence is not a void. It is the very resonance that gives your life its meaning. Suffering does not arise because you occasionally pause it. Arises because you demand that the tempo remain high speed in a life that requires a much deeper, more harmonic pace. Maybe you have felt this too, the way you look at your own day and see only the gaps, the missed opportunities, the moments where you stopped to rest and felt a wave of guilt for not playing louder or faster. You compare your inner world to a static image of how you think a productive person should live, and you see only your own fragmentation. You pretend you are playing a masterwork, smiling while the bamboo flute in your hands is cracking from the tension, and you check your progress against a tempo that ignores the natural, swaying rhythm of your own heart. This is the weight of the unfinished, the sharp, stinging memory of every note you didn't strike, or every cadence you failed to maintain with precision. You do not have to carry them. The wind does not mourn the change of the key, and you, dear friend, do not have to mourn the changing rhythm of your own spirit. If you are willing, shift your focus to the sensation of your weight against the surface beneath you. Feel the way your body rests, the way your muscles are finally beginning to slacken, losing that rigid, alert posture you have held throughout the busy hours. You have been sitting as if you were still on stage, bracing yourself against the unpredictability of the next measure. But tonight, the invitation is simply to let the instrument rest. You don't have to be the conductor of your own heartbeat. You only have to be the one who sits in the quiet, listening to the resonance of the air as it vibrates in the rafters of your mind. Can you feel the subtle change when you release the tension in your hands? That is the sound of a note finally being allowed to fade into the dark, rather than being forced into a sequence that denies the space it needs to be heard. You are already beginning the process of release, and there is no pressure to hurry the tempo. You have spent so much time being the performer who worries about the consistency of the rhythm, the one who tracks every deviation with an anxious, analytical ear, the one who keeps a list of every beat that must be perfectly met before the sun sets. This is the identity of the perfection seeker. But beneath the anxiety of the music, there is a person who simply wants to rest, to feel the relief of not having to justify the tune, to hear the way the shadows look on the floor, to feel the stillness of the hall without immediately needing it to be a finished concert. That person is still here. They are the one who is currently listening. the one who is weary of the effort, the one who is brave enough to sit in the dark and admit that the composition is too vast to be held in your conscious grip all at once. There is a profound, ancient mercy in realizing that you cannot control the resonance of your own life. The melody will have its high, piercing passages, its low, hummed intervals, and its stretches of absolute, unvarnished quiet. Trying to force yourself to play a flawless concerto in the middle of a shifting room does not change the acoustics, it only drains the life from your fingers. When you feel that familiar itch to start criticizing your lack of speed, or the compulsion to mentally sort through all the notes you haven't managed to hit, pause for a moment. Do not judge the habit. It came from a place of wanting to be significant. It was, in its own way, a form of devotion to your own life's song, but it has outlived its usefulness. Tonight, we will learn how to walk through the echoing pavilion of your own mind. We will see the notes you have been clutching, the bright, desperate aspirations for tomorrow, the hollow, replayed echoes of your past mistakes, and we will decide, one by one, which ones are ready to be left to the wind. You are allowed to be silent. You are allowed to be unadorned by the requirements of a melody that is still being written by time itself. As you lie here, allow yourself to drift into a state where your only responsibility is to notice the rhythm of your breath. If a thought comes, let it come. If a regret surfaces, let it be seen as a sound fading into the distance. You are the musician, and the resonance is far larger, far more patient, and far more harmonic than any single tune you have ever tried to maintain. You are safe enough to let the flute go. You are safe enough to feel the surprising, almost frightening, lightness of hands that no longer have to grip the tempo. The music will not disappear if you stop trying to keep it frantic. It will simply settle into the deep, restorative harmony of its own unique silence. You will be here in the morning, and you will meet the day with a heart that is no longer aching from the effort of the performance. For now, there is only the cooling air, the dark, and the permission to stop managing your own song. The stage is settling, the acoustics are deepening, and the peace of the musician who finally trusts the silence is beginning to touch your brow. In a secluded wooden pavilion tucked high into the shoulder of a mist-heavy valley, there lived a flautist named Elias. The pavilion was a place of profound acoustic clarity, where the slightest whisper of a mountain breeze against the valley walls would swell into a low, resonant hum. Elias was a man who lived by the tempo of his own making, his life defined by the rigorous, unceasing schedule of his compositions. He was known throughout the mountain passes for his ability to play melodies of immense complexity, pieces so fast and intricate that they left his audience breathless. Yet, Elias himself was rarely breathless with wonder. He was breathless with the strain of his own performance. He carried his flute, a long, hollow bamboo shaft that had never been varnished or treated, and he played it with such aggressive intensity that the wood had begun to show hairline cracks near the embouchure. He lived in constant fear that if he ever faltered, if he ever let the tempo drop or failed to fill the silence with a flurry of notes, the valley would reveal its emptiness, and he would be left with nothing but his own inadequacies. He treated the silence of the mountain not as a companion, but as an adversary that needed to be conquered by sound. Every morning before dawn he would stand on the pavilion deck, eyes narrowed, fingers moving in a blur, his breath hitched in jagged, shallow gasps. He was obsessed with the idea that he was a conduit for a divine music, and that any gap in his performance was a personal failing, a sign that he was losing his focus, his relevance, or his grip on the art he had sacrificed everything to master. One afternoon, a recluse known only as the Master of the Pass, a man who played no instrument but was said to understand the language of the mountain's resonance, walked up to the pavilion. The Master of the Pass was a thin, elderly figure whose movements were as deliberate and slow as the turning of the seasons. He found Elias hunched over his bamboo flute, his face flushed, trying to force a particularly demanding phrase that kept slipping through his fingers. The Master of the Pass did not speak. He simply walked to the edge of the pavilion and stood there, his back to the musician, his gaze fixed on the way the clouds drifted through the distant pines. He stayed there for an hour, then two, his presence as still as the cedar pillars that held up the roof. Elias, feeling the weight of the observer, played louder, faster, pushing his lungs to the point of pain. He wanted to impress the old man with the sheer virtuosity of his craft, but the more he played, the more the flute shrieked, the thin bamboo struggling to contain the force of his frustration. Finally, Elias slumped, the flute dropping from his lips to clatter against the wooden floor. He looked at the master of the pass, his chest heaving, his eyes wet with the bitter, tired tears of someone who had spent his life running from the silence he was creating. He asked the old man, "Why is it that no matter how hard I play, no matter how many notes I weave into the air, the valley never seems to hear me? Why does the silence always return, louder and more hollow than before?" The master of the past did not answer immediately. He reached into the small woven bag at his waist and pulled out a heavy silver tuning fork. He struck it against the edge of a floorboard, and a pure, piercing note rang out, a crystalline, vibrating sound that seemed to slice through the stale, heavy air of the pavilion. The vibration hummed in the wood beneath their feet, resonated in the walls, and then slowly, gracefully began to fade. The master of the past did not strike it again. He held the fork out in his open palm, waiting. They sat together in the mounting stillness, listening as the last, faintest shimmer of the sound dissolved into the ambient noise of the valley, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of dry leaves, the soft, pervasive sigh of the wind. He looked at Elias and said, "You are so busy trying to build a castle of sound that you have forgotten the ground it stands upon. You think the music is the note, but the music is only the permission you give the silence to be heard. Tell me, if you strike the silver, does the vibration become the fork? Or is the vibration merely the way the fork confesses its own nature to the air?" Elias looked at the tuning fork, its metal surface dull and still. He realized that the fork did not fight to keep the note going. It struck, it resonated, and then it returned to its own quiet, steady state. It was not the sound that had been exhausting him. It was his attempt to hold the sound in the air, his refusal to let the vibration complete its natural journey. Elias looked at his cracked, unvarnished flute. He saw that he had been treating the bamboo as a weapon, a means to defend himself against a silence he found terrifying. He realized that the fatigue in his hands was not from the music, but from the desperate, invisible labor of pushing against the natural ebb of the world. He reached out and touched the silver tuning fork in the master's hand, feeling the final, lingering trace of warmth from the metal. In that moment he felt the heavy, rigid structure of his own self-importance begin to bend. He realized that he could stop playing. The mountain would not collapse. The valley would not grow dark. The world would continue to resonate in its own, infinitely deeper key, and he would finally be allowed to participate in that resonance without having to be its creator. The master of the past turned and began his slow descent down the mountain path, his footsteps light and rhythmic, leaving no trace behind him. Elias remained on the floor of the pavilion, the flute resting on his lap. He did not pick it up. He watched the light move across the cedar planks, noting the subtle shifts in the shadows as the sun lowered itself behind the jagged peaks. He realized that he had been living in a state of constant, high-frequency agitation, as if he were a note being held forever, never allowed to resolve. He began to see that his suffering was not in the music, but in the contraction of his own being, the way he had pulled his awareness tight into a singular, frantic point of performance. He spent the rest of the afternoon doing nothing at all. He didn't practice. He didn't compose. He simply sat. He noticed that the silence of the valley was not empty. It was full of texture. There was the rhythmic scrape of a pine branch against the roof, the deep, resonant booming of a distant waterfall, and the soft, intermittent chirping of insects as they prepared for the coming night. It was a symphony, and he had been so obsessed with his own solo that he had been deaf to the harmony of the entire mountain. He felt the tightness in his shoulders, that long-held, stubborn knot of the performer finally loosen, as if a thread had been cut. He hadn't become a new man, and his old anxieties hadn't vanished into thin air, but the urgency had changed. The tempo had shifted. The music was no longer a burden he had to carry. It was a phenomenon he was invited to inhabit. This is the recognition. You have been holding your life with the same frantic, iron-grip tension Elias used to hold his flute. You have been so terrified of the gaps, so anxious about the silence, that you have forgotten how to actually breathe in the resonance of your own existence. You have believed that your worth was tied to the tempo, to the speed of your output, and to the ability to keep your personal melody playing louder than the wind. But look at the silver fork. It did not hold the note, it allowed the note to exist. And then it allowed the note to pass, returning to its own steady, silent center. You are the musician, but you are not the resonance. You have no authority over the way the wind moves through the valley, and you have no power to prevent the rests that are necessary for the melody to breathe. Stop trying to outplay the wind with a tool that only shatters when forced. Stop trying to squeeze your life into a tempo that denies the reality of the room you are standing in. You are allowed to be silent. You are allowed to be unplayed. You are allowed to let the rhythm slacken, even if you don't yet understand where the silence is leading. The melody is already being written, and the resonance is already vibrating, and your hands are already doing more than enough, simply by being willing to hold the instrument in the quiet of the evening. As you lie here, listen to the space around you. Feel how the air moves through the room, independent of your need for it to be filled with sound. Let the memory of that tuning fork, that simple, steady piece of silver, be a reminder of your own capacity to return to your center after you have been struck by the demands of your own day. You don't have to be perfect to be a musician. You don't have to be fast to be a person. You only have to be present for the vibration and for the feeling of the flute as it rests in the quiet of the night. You are doing fine, and the music is being held, even the notes you have forgotten to play. Stay with this sensation, letting your fingers uncurl, feeling the space of the room expand, and know that you are finally beginning to see that the silence was never your enemy, it was just the medium, and you are the one who is finally learning how to play within it. The resonance is deep, the stage is vast, and you have reached the point where you no longer need to be the master of the melody. You only need to be the guest of the harmony. There is a deep ancient quiet waiting for you, and it is found in the simple, unhurried act of breathing and of allowing the instrument to rest in your palm, light as a whisper, still as the dark. Everything is being held, everything is being sung, and tonight you can simply watch, you can simply listen, and you can simply be. The flautist's frantic effort to outplay the wind is not a failure of character, nor is it a judgment on the dedication he brought to his art. We often view the gaps in our own lives, the moments when our momentum stalls, the times when our circumstances shift and obscure the rhythm we thought we were following, as a flaw that must be corrected with more speed or more volume. We bring our instruments to the center of our own lives, convinced that if we only play faster, strike harder, or discipline our minds with greater rigor, we could force the melody to remain fixed and unbroken. But the suffering in this story was not birthed by the silence of the valley, it was born from the flautist's desperate refusal to accept that the valley required a different kind of music. He was trying to create a composition that could exist outside of the rhythm of the mountain, and in his exhaustion, he lost the ability to feel the beauty of the resonance as it unfolded. When we look at this with the gentle eyes of Buddhist wisdom, we see that the true burden is rarely the reality of our life's pace. It is the way our minds curate and magnify our resistance, creating a landscape of rigid expectations that we are forced to inhabit. You know this weight. It is the hollow fatigue of looking at the composition of your own days and mourning the rests you didn't take or the notes you felt you missed, as if clinging to a version of your performance that was always on could somehow stop the world from demanding its natural pauses. You are not protecting your value by holding on to these frantic, forced cadences. You are merely ensuring that you remain too drained to actually feel the vibration in your hands right now. Consider the nature of the first and second pains, an understanding that helps us stop turning our lives into a marathon of unnecessary friction. The first pain is the room itself, the actual, unpredictable acoustics of your life. It is the sudden change in tempo, the confusing shift in how your energy ebbs and flows, the moments where you are asked to navigate a reality that feels too quiet or too unpredictable to be trusted. These are the natural frequencies of being human, the inevitable vibrations of living. We cannot command the wind to stop blowing, and we cannot demand that our life's rhythm remain static in a world defined by its own pulse. This is the first pain, and it becomes profoundly easier to bear when it is left to be exactly what it is. The second pain, the one that leaves your fingers aching and your heart brittle, is the layer of judgment, analysis, and defensive posturing that the mind adds to the first. It is the internal voice that says, "I should have played that differently," or "If I am not constantly producing a melody, then I have no worth," or "I must force this silence to make sense." This is the second wound, and it is a self-inflicted injury. It is not the silence of the mountain that exhausts you. It is the intensity you insist on maintaining because you are afraid to stand in a valley that is not filled with your own noise. You have been adding a second layer of struggle to every pause, turning a natural part of the human experience into a crisis of identity. The beauty of this teaching is not that it asks you to abandon your history or stop caring about your creative contributions. It asks you to stop turning your life into a performance that must be shielded from the quiet. We confuse volume with safety because it feels like something we can actually influence. When the reality of our modern lives feels threatening, too fast, too fragmented, too loud, our hands reach out to grasp anything that can be measured or played. We compare our unseen inner lives to the polished surfaces of other people's public symphonies. We criticize our own tempo, and we audit our pasts to find the specific note that caused the current dissonance. These are all attempts to find solid ground on a stage that is constantly being rearranged by the turning of the seasons. But the more you try to solidify your existence through the rigidity of your demands, the more you become like the flautist, stiff, focused only on the lack, and unable to feel the simple harmonic grace of the air as it moves through the bamboo. True peace is not the absence of pauses. It is a profound change in your relationship with them. It is the capacity to sit in the hall when the music fades and feel the confusion of the silence, without deciding that you must immediately reverse it or lament it as a personal failure. It is the ability to look at the missed notes of your past attempts, the projects that slowed, the ambitions that changed, the versions of you that didn't stay the same, and recognize that they were merely the resonance of a story that is still being written. You are practicing the wisdom of the listener. You are moving away from the identity of the performer who must force the tempo to be constant, and into the identity of the student who is finally, tentatively, willing to see the composition as it is, rather than as they fear it might be. This does not happen through an act of force. You cannot simply command your heart to stop longing for a sense of consistent melody. The transition begins the moment you stop treating every internal anxiety as a command to be obeyed. When a thought of "I am not playing enough" arises, do not mistake it for a weather report that requires your immediate action. It is just a thought, a flicker, a movement of the mind's vibration. When a feeling of being behind creeps in, do not mistake it for a final judgment on your soul. It is just an emotion passing like a shadow across the expanse of your consciousness. By witnessing these things without clinging to them, you are already setting down the instrument. You are already making room for the air to circulate around the vibration of your own spirit. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your worth through your ability to produce, to sustain, and to stabilize. You have equated the tension in your breath with the depth of your devotion to your own survival. But this is a misunderstanding of what it means to be alive. Your worth was never determined by the complexity of the tune you could sustain. Your strength was never measured by your ability to keep the silence from encroaching. You are allowed to be a person who slows down, a person who rests, a person who listens, and a person who watches the shadows move across the floor without needing to account for every millisecond of the day. This is the radical, quiet freedom that the flautist was pointing toward when he finally set aside the tool that was meant to force the sound. The exhaustion you feel tonight is not a symptom of your incompetence. It is a sign that you have finally reached the limit of what can be carried while ignoring the valley's natural pace. That exhaustion is actually a gift. It is the body's way of saying, "Enough, we cannot live like this anymore." It is the instrument itself telling you that you are ready for a different way of participating. You do not have to know how to inhabit the quiet of your own life. You do not have to have a plan for how you will compose the coming days. You only have to sit with the dissonance you have been resisting, and for just a few moments, Feel how much you have been restricting your own air. This is the work of a lifetime, yet it is practiced entirely in the span of a single conscious moment. It is found in the pause between the urge to strike the note and the decision to let the vibration fade. It is found in the moment you realize that the anxiety you feel is not the truth of your situation. You are not losing your music. You are finding your melody. You are reclaiming your resonance from the clutter of the past. As you lie here in the dark, let yourself feel the vastness of the pavilion. Notice how the space around you is not filled with tasks, not filled with threats, and not filled with the need to finish. It is just space, it is just quiet, and you are the one who is here, breathing within it. There is nothing left to solve right now. The master has moved on, the flute is resting, and you are sitting on the edge of your own hall. The night is deep, the wind has quieted to a whisper, and the tension is left in the dust. You do not have to be the one who ensures the rhythm stays static. You do not have to be the one who manages the resonance of your own existence. You are simply the one who is breathing, the one who is listening, and the one who is beginning to realize that the melody was always much softer than you were told. Stay with this softness for a little longer, feeling the rhythm of the dark, and know that you are finally, mercifully, allowed to be unplayed. The sound will continue when the light comes. But tonight, the hall is only the space beneath your skin, the quiet in your mind, and the peace of a heart that is finally learning how to rest without the weight of the performance. Everything you have played was for a reason, but now the labor is finished, and the notes are finally, beautifully, free to fade as they will. If it feels right, allow your body to sink a little deeper into the softness beneath you, letting the phantom vibration of your own frantic tempo begin to dissipate into the dark, quiet corners of the room. You are no longer required to be the relentless composer of your own destiny, bracing yourself to strike every note with perfect, exhausting precision in this unconducted, still territory of the night. Your hands can finally remember how it feels to have no melody to maintain, no discordant phrase to justify, and no complex performance to uphold before the world awakens. Take a long, slow, unhurried breath, sensing the air as it moves cool and steady into your lungs. And then, as you exhale, imagine the restless energy of your need to keep playing flowing out with the breath, leaving behind a stillness that belongs entirely to you. You might notice as the silence deepens that your mind still feels a persistent flicker of movement, a sudden, sharp thought about a conversation left unresolved, or a fleeting, anxious worry about whether you have been focused enough or fast enough to keep your life in harmony today. This is not a sign that you are failing at being still. It is simply the nature of a mind that has been kept very busy in the service of everyone but itself. Do not try to snap that thought away. Do not reach for the tools of your past to strike the silence until the worry is safely resolved. Instead, simply observe it. Visualize that thought as a single stray frequency caught in the resonance of your awareness. It is just a sound. It is not an obstacle to your peace. It is merely a part of the atmosphere that you are currently standing beside. You may gently name this pattern of thinking if you wish. Is it the urge to be the perfect performer? Is it the fear of being seen as out of tune if you stop striking the note so compulsively? Just observe the shape of it. Notice how it tries to demand your attention, pulling at the sleeve of your awareness. Now, imagine yourself back in that quiet, high-altitude pavilion, standing where the light shifts across the floorboards in time with the sighing of the mountain pines. Imagine that you are holding this specific concern as if it were a physical object. Perhaps it is that heavy, silver tuning fork, or perhaps it is a delicate, unvarnished bamboo flute you have been trying to force into a song that has no beginning and no end. In your mind's eye, slowly walk toward the center of the pavilion, where the floor is cool and the air is still. You are not discarding yourself. You are simply placing the weight of that one specific concern down on the aged cedar wood. Let it rest there, where the vast expanse of the evening can naturally allow the vibration to fade. Watch what happens when you turn your back on that object and walk toward the higher ground of your own internal landscape. The thought does not disappear, but it loses its power to command your performance. It becomes a part of the pavilion, a small, inconsequential piece of the whole, while you remain free to walk back toward the center of your own rest. Notice how the space in your chest feels now that you are not clutching that instrument. You might feel a lightness, a subtle shifting in the way your ribs expand with each breath. This is the beginning of the transition. You are not destroying the music, you are merely choosing to stop being its hostage. If another thought arrives, do not feel discouraged. Another plume of dissonance may rise, or the wind may howl against the distant, jagged peaks of the mountains. Just notice it. Acknowledge its presence with a gentle, non-judgmental gaze. You do not have to be the one to decide if the thought is harmonious or jarring. It is just part of the cycle. If you feel the urge to run back and pick up the tuning fork, simply pause. Feel the cool air on your skin. Remember the wide, changing acoustics of the room that remain indifferent to your tempo. You are the musician, but you are not the wind. You are the one who witnesses the resonance, not the one who forces the sound to stay alive. Even noticing your struggle to stand down is enough. You do not have to force yourself into a state of profound meditation. You do not have to reach a specific level of inner harmony. The fact that you are here, choosing to sit with your own internal noise without resorting to your old habits of mental correction, is already a profound act of wisdom. It is a way of saying to your restless mind, I hear you, I see you, but I do not need to be the only thing keeping this melody alive. Return your attention to the feeling of your body against the surface beneath you. Feel the support of the floor, the way the night air rests against your skin. You are held by something much larger than your own performance anxiety. The mountain does not ask the wind to be a melody. The pavilion does not ask the silence to be a note. They simply allow the cycle to happen. You can do the same. If your mind wanders, gently guide it back to the sensation of the breath, not by forcing it, but by inviting it, as you would invite a weary fellow traveler to sit for a moment by the fire. There is no need to rush. The hours of the night are wide and deep. You have nowhere else to be, and there is nothing you have to prove to the darkness. Everything that has happened, and everything that has yet to happen, can remain on the other side of this moment. In this space, you are not defined by your tempo, your virtuosity, or your practice schedule. You are defined only by your capacity to witness the vibration and the quiet without needing to interfere with either. Maybe you can sense the shift occurring right now, as you stop trying to manage the intensity of your own inner growth. The air in your room might feel a little softer, a little more spacious. This is not because your mind has stopped moving, but because you have stopped trying to trap it within the strike of the fork. You are practicing the art of simply being present, allowing the loose notes of your life to fade as they naturally will. While you sit on the quiet, cool wood, breathing in the scent of aged cedar, do not worry if you drift or if your focus slips. That is exactly what is supposed to happen when you finally stop obsessively playing. The mind will move and your awareness will return, over and over again, in a cycle that is as natural as the arrival of the stars. Each time you notice yourself drifting, just return to the breath, return to the image of the pavilion, return to the feeling of your hands, empty and at rest, lying on your lap. You are safe enough to let go. You are enough just as you are, without a single phrase needing to be resolved, or a single cadence needing to be perfected. Stay in this softness for a little longer, watching the horizon breathe, until the rhythm of your own heart begins to match the deep, slow pulse of the mountain itself. You spent so much of your life trying to hold the tempo, and tonight you are finally learning that you too are a guest in this hall, and you too are being held by the very resonance you have been trying so desperately to control. You have played long enough, and the floor is cool, and the flute is left in the shadow. And for now, that is enough to let the mind finally, beautifully, begin to unwind. In a valley where the air was perpetually cool, heavy with the scent of damp moss and pine needles, lived a young, impatient drummer named Koi. He worked in a monastic compound known for its ritual percussion, where the beat of the drum was intended to ground the monks in the present moment, anchoring their awareness to the earth. Koi, however, treated the drum not as an anchor, but as a race. He felt that the faster he played, the more he could outrun his own internal restlessness, the persistent hum of thoughts that told him he was falling behind, that his life lacked the significance of his elders. His drum was a heavy, hollowed cedar log, its skin stretched taut and dark. Every day his knuckles grew calloused, his breath jagged, and his brow perpetually furrowed with the strain of attempting to play a rhythm that the world was not even asking for. The challenge arose during the season of the Great Stillness, a time when the monastery ceased all unnecessary sound. Koi was tasked with striking the drum only at the sunrise and the sunset, but the silence between those markers felt like a vacuum that threatened to swallow him whole. He found himself pacing the stone courtyard, his hands twitching, his mind racing to compose complex, rapid-fire beats that he would perform once the curfew lifted. He was suffering deeply, not because the monastery was silent, but because he was terrified that if he were truly silent, he would have to confront the fact that he felt empty, disconnected, and fundamentally unplayed. He believed that if he stopped drumming, his identity would vanish, leaving him as nothing more than a ghost drifting through the shadows of the temple. One afternoon he found the old temple keeper, a woman who spent her days tending to the moss gardens. Sitting by a shallow stone basin filled with rainwater, she was simply watching the ripples, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Koi approached her, his frustration leaking out in sharp, erratic movements of his shoulders. He asked her how she could possibly bear the emptiness, how she could stand to exist in a valley that seemed so indifferent to his need for rhythm. He confessed that he felt like a drum with a skin so tight it was about to snap, his entire life a buildup of tension that never found its release. He was looking for a secret technique, a way to play faster, to fill the silence so completely that the ache of his own loneliness would finally stop throbbing. The keeper did not look up immediately. She waited for a falling leaf to break the surface of the basin, creating a series of concentric circles that slowly pulsed outward, touching the edges of the stone before vanishing. She gestured for Koi to sit beside the water. She handed him a small, smooth river stone and asked him to drop it into the center. When he did, he instinctively went to place his hand into the water to stop the ripples, as if he could fix the disturbance he had created. The keeper gently caught his wrist, holding it steady. She asked him to watch not the stone, and not the splash, but the space between the ripples, the areas of stillness that remained even as the water moved. Koi stared into the basin, his pulse hammering in his throat. He saw that the movement of the water was only possible because of the stillness that already existed. If the basin were not still, the ripples could not travel, they would be chaotic, lost in the noise of a surface that could not hold a shape. He realized that his drumming had become a form of violence against the very medium that allowed his music to exist. He had been so focused on the vibration, the ego's need to be felt, to be heard, to be moving, that he had ignored the necessity of the silence that held his notes. He felt a sudden, sharp, and merciful exhaustion. He didn't become a master of the drum in that instant. He didn't stop feeling the fear of being unplayed, but he did something profoundly transformative. He took his hands away from the water and let the ripples complete their journey on their own. He stood up, bowed to the keeper, and walked back to the drum. But he didn't pick up his beaters. He sat on the floor, his back against the cedar wood, and he simply listened. He listened to the wind in the pines, the distant drip of water, and the slow, rhythmic beating of his own heart. He noticed that his heart was not playing a race, it was playing a steady, calm, and vital cadence that existed whether he was drumming or not. He realized he didn't need to force the rhythm to prove his existence. He was already part of the mountain's music. He began to practice a small act of discipline. Whenever he felt the urge to rush, to fill the space with noise, he would pause, take one full deep breath, and only then, if the impulse remained, would he strike the drum softly, with intention, and with space to let the sound fade. Koji's transformation was quiet and steady. He became the drummer who learned to play the rests. When he drummed at sunrise, he no longer aimed for speed, he aimed for the resonance, the way a single strike could hold the attention of the entire valley, inviting the listener into the stillness rather than assaulting them with a barrage of sound. He stopped treating his own silence as a void to be filled and started treating it as a sanctuary to be inhabited. He forgave himself for all the years he had spent playing in fear, not by pretending the fear hadn't been real, but by accepting it as a note that had already been played and released. He became a person who could sit with the uncertainty of the rhythm, who could accept the quiet as a companion rather than an adversary, and who could, at last, Find a peace that didn't depend on being constantly heard. When the monastery held its annual festival, Koi sat at his drum, surrounded by the expectant crowd. He didn't open with a flourish of speed. He waited until the hall was completely still, until the silence felt heavy and complete, and only then did he strike. The sound was deep, grounding, and slow. He played for an hour, but it was an hour composed largely of gaps of moments where he sat perfectly still, letting the vibration of the drum die away into the rafters before striking again. The crowd, initially confused, began to feel the shift. They weren't being entertained, they were being invited to participate in the silence. They felt their own shoulders drop, their own racing minds settle into the pulse of the drum. And in that shared space, they found a connection that was far deeper than any frantic melody could have provided. This is the deeper transformation, the understanding that you can be present for your own internal rhythm without needing to force it into a performance for the world. You have been like Koi, trying to fill your life with a constant stream of notes because you are terrified that if you ever stop, you will be seen as empty or failing. But the resonance you are seeking isn't found in the flurry of your daily tasks, it's found in the willingness to let the beats fade. The next time you find yourself gripped by the need to ensure your life is constantly accelerating, pause. Feel the tension in your hands, the way your mind is frantically scanning for the next note to hit, and then see if you can strike the drum once, and simply wait for the sound to become the silence. You don't have to be a seamless, unbroken composition to be worthy. You don't have to thrive in a way that looks like a static, unceasing crescendo. You only have to sit with the reality of your current rhythm, whether it is fast and chaotic or slow and uncertain. You are not defined by the speed of your life. You are defined by the depth of your presence while you occupy it. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the image of the drum in the quiet, mossy valley be the final image of your struggle. The beaters are set aside. The vibration is waiting. The valley knows its own music far better than you ever could, and the composition of your life is unfolding exactly as it must, in a space that is as unpredictable, beautiful, and vast as your own heart. The performance has ended. The hall is still, and you are finally resting in the truth that you never had to be the master of the resonance. You only had to be the one who knows how to listen to whatever sound is held in your breath. There is a great, deep peace in realizing that your life does not need to be played at a frantic tempo, it only needs to be lived. One beat, one silence, one quiet moment of resonance at a time. Feel the weight of your body finally sinking into the earth, the way the night air moves across your skin, and know that you are finally, mercifully, allowed to be empty of expectation, full of rest, and perfectly simply here. The drum is silent, the pulse is at rest, and you are home. The ache of dissonance, the sense that you are failing to maintain the harmony of your life, or that you are falling behind in the composition because the tempo feels inconsistent, is not a sign that your song is falling apart, but a sign that your old way of understanding your own resonance has finally exhausted its utility. You have lived in the echo of this perceived fragmentation, feeling the pressure to remain as vibrant and flawless as you were, in the height of your most effortless hours, as if the value of a musician could only be measured by the absolute stability of the notes. You have mistaken the natural shifting of the acoustics for a decline in your own creative essence. Yet consider how much of your internal suffering is actually the friction of this resistance. The way you use your mind like a tuning fork that only knows how to vibrate at a frequency of agitation, trying to force the rhythm of reality into a rigid, unmoving shape so that you can insist on a melody that no longer exists in this changing air. This emotional mechanism, this constant rehearsal of the future and mourning of the past is the engine of your unrest. When life brings a challenge, when your focus fragments, or when a goal you once pursued is no longer yours to claim, this is the first pain. It is the raw, unadorned experience of being alive in a world that is always in transition. It is the shifting of the acoustics, the unpredictability of the resonance, the inevitable unevenness of a human life. This first pain is not something you are meant to defeat, it is simply part of the landscape. But the mind, in its fear of being out of rhythm, adds a second, far heavier layer of struggle. It adds the judgment, the comparison, and the desperate, frantic effort to keep everything exactly as it was. It adds the shame of feeling muted, the fear that you have somehow lost your connection, and the internal voice that demands you strike a chord even in the dimmest, most erratic silence. This is the second wound, and it is a self-inflicted burden. It is not the silence of the valley that exhausts your spirit. It is the intensity you insist on maintaining, because you are afraid to stand in a place that is not filled with your own noise. You have been adding a second layer of struggle to every pause, turning a natural part of the human experience into a crisis of identity. When you treat your natural need for stillness as a lapse in your ability to perform, you are doing violence to your own heart. You are using the tempo of your past successes to measure the depth of your present worth. And because the rhythm of your memory no longer matches the terrain of your current reality, you conclude that you are failing, but you are not failing. You are simply in a season that requires a different kind of wisdom. The wisdom of the rest, the wisdom of deep, quiet, untraceable harmony, the wisdom of letting the vibration go so that the soul can finally breathe. Buddhist wisdom suggests that the suffering here is not in the shifting or the unfinished nature of your days. It is in the identity you have built around the finished melody. You have made the illusion of a perfect, static concerto your home, and now that the acoustics are moving, you feel like you are being evicted. But your identity is not the music. Your identity is the musician who remains constant through the sharp clarity of the morning and the deep, hollow resonance of the evening. The musician who remains when the instrument is still and the stage is empty. Peace is not found in the absence of this transition. It is found in the capacity to stand within the transition, without adding the second wound of self-reproach. It is the ability to feel the melancholy of the fading note, without deciding that the musician has lost his way. Think of how much of your energy is spent trying to reconcile your inner world with a version of yourself that exists only in your own rearview mirror. You want to be at ease, but only on the condition that your clarity, your rhythm, and your output remain at the peak of their consistent intensity. But the Buddhist perspective invites you to reverse this. It invites you to find your center in the reality that is already here, with all its cooling shadows, its inconsistent tempo, and its emerging stillness. This does not mean you abandon your responsibilities or stop contributing to the world. It means you stop turning your life into a performance of who you used to be. When you feel that familiar pull to judge yourself for the way your focus is moving, pause. Breathe into that tightness in your chest. Notice the reflex. Acknowledge that it comes from a place of wanting to be significant. And then, for a single moment, choose not to follow the thought. Do not fight the judgment. Do not try to silence it by force. Just hold it in your awareness, like a sound that is drifting away into the high rafters of the pavilion. See it for what it is, a protective habit, a piece of old rusted gear you no longer need to carry. You might find that when you stop feeding the second pain, the first pain, the simple fact of the changing resonance becomes much easier to inhabit. The reality of your life's complexity still exists, but it loses its sharp, stinging edge when it is no longer being amplified by your own self-judgment. You stop turning your life into a survey of all the ways you are not enough. You start living it as an experience to be felt, to be resonated with, and to be eventually surrendered. It is a slow, quiet work to dismantle the habit of defining your worth by your ability to manage the sound. It does not happen in an instant, and it is not something you achieve once and for all. It is a practice you return to, over and over, whenever you notice yourself reaching for the tuning fork of your own criticism. You will reach for it. That is the nature of a mind that has been taught to fear the quiet. But each time you notice, each time you feel the phantom weight of that silver in your hand, and choose to leave it on the floor, you are growing in a different kind of strength. You are growing in the strength of understanding. You are learning that you are not the notes that form, you are the one who watches them appear. The one who remains when the melody is blurred, and the one who knows that the quiet, unmeasured moments are not a waste, but a sacred, necessary space for the spirit to expand. Many of the things you fear, the loss of your former tempo, the discomfort of the transition, the feeling of being removed from the frantic pace of the world, are not actually enemies of your peace. They are simply parts of the human experience. When you stop fighting them, you stop being exhausted by them. You may find that your mind is still busy, that thoughts still arise about how you should be playing, and that your heart still feels the weight of the change. But you are no longer adding the extra burden of should. You are no longer holding yourself hostage to the idea that you must be someone other than who you are in this very unfolding moment. Rest in this recognition. Let it settle into the very marrow of your bones. You have been carrying the weight of an entire symphony on your shoulders, believing that if you ever let go, your purpose would wither away. But the musician does not lose his purpose when he sets the instrument down. He enters a new, deeper intimacy with the hall. The pavilion is not your enemy, and the movement of the air is not your failure. It is just the way the world breathes, and you, standing in the pavilion, are the witness who allows it all to be. You do not need to solve this. You do not need to understand it completely tonight. You only need to be the one who sits in the quiet and watches the harmony shift, as the second wound finally begins to heal from the simple, honest act of being met with kindness. The night is deepening, and the echoes of your past concerts are fading into the vast, open expanse of the sky, leaving you in a stillness that is finally, mercifully, your own. You have played long enough, and the floor is cool, and the flute is left in the shadow, and for now that is enough. This wisdom is not intended to be tucked away in the quiet of a wooden pavilion, nor is it a philosophy meant only for the stillness of a mountain valley. It is meant for the very moments when your life feels the most cluttered with the debris of expectations, the times when you feel the heavy, vibrating strike of your own internal tuning fork pulling at your spirit. Consider the common, quiet struggles of a modern day the way you might find yourself checking your device for the 5th time, waiting for a digital signal that you believe will finally validate your rhythm or settle the restless tide of your insecurity. That impulse to reach for external reassurance is just like the musician pacing the perimeter of his stage, checking the strings for dissonance that only exists in his own anxious imagination. It is a reflex born of the fear that if you are not constantly tending to the signals, you will somehow cease to be relevant, or you will be forgotten in the rush of the turning world. In that moment, you do not have to put the device down to practice the lesson. You only have to notice the tightening in your hand, the way your grip has become sharp and demanding. You only have to recognize that your desire for confirmation is not the same thing as the truth of your own steady, unchanging heart. You can breathe, acknowledge the ache of the waiting, and choose to let the air pass through your awareness without needing to force a specific outcome. Think of those long, restless nights when your mind begins to replay a mistake you made weeks, or even years ago. You are lying in the dark, your body tired, but your thoughts are busy reenacting the same scene, trying to find a better cadence. You are convinced that if you just analyze the interaction one more time, if you just find the perfect wording you should have used, you will finally achieve the quiet you crave. But harmony does not come from the perfection of the past. It comes from the willingness to admit that the note has already slipped into the fabric of history. When you find yourself in this loop, you are essentially standing before the stage, trying to recall a vibration that has already been absorbed into the air. Instead of fighting the memory, try to feel the physical sensation of the shame or the regret. Do not make it a story about who you are. Just make it a sensation in your body, a warmth, a heaviness, a tightness. By observing the physical feeling rather than the intellectual story, you are already stepping away from the walls that echo back the pain. You are letting the sound fade, and in doing so, you are allowing yourself to finally rest in the dark. It is also for those times when you are sitting in a room full of people, perhaps participating, while feeling an immense heavy weight inside that no one else can see. You are afraid that if you stop performing, if you stop keeping your internal melody in full, vibrant sound to maintain your image, others will see the signs of your fatigue and judge you for it. But this, too, is a form of control. It is the belief that your inner peace is a public responsibility. You can care for others, you can be present for them, and you can still allow your own inner world to be unplayed and vulnerable. You do not have to be a polished, finished symphony to be worthy of belonging. You are allowed to be in the middle of your own turning, even if that turning looks messy or quiet to the rest of the world. When you feel the heavy guilt that comes with needing to rest, recognize it as the voice of an audience member who thinks they have the right to demand your constant output. You do not have to earn your right to breathe. You do not have to earn your right to be still. The pavilion does not earn its peace, it simply inhabits the space where the resonance happens. You can do the same. If your mind tells you that you are falling behind, or that others are further ahead, or that you have not achieved enough to justify a quiet moment, tell yourself that these are just reflections of the vibration. They are not laws. They are not instructions for how you must live your life. They are just frequencies that have bounced off the memories of your past. You can watch them vibrate without feeling obligated to agree with them. Practice this in the small moments of your day. A single breath before you answer an email is a form of profound wisdom. A moment of pause before you react to an unkind word is a way of saying that you are not going to be ruled by your own defensive reflexes. You are not trying to change the world. You are trying to be someone who is no longer at war with the acoustics of it. You are trying to become a person who can witness the noise of modern life without needing to become the noise yourself. You can care deeply about the people in your life without gripping them so tightly that you bruise the harmony. And you can honor the work you do without demanding that the result define your soul. There will be days when you forget. There will be days when you find yourself deep in the panic, desperately trying to strike the tuning fork, convinced that if you don't resonate to keep your life in line, it will surely fall into dissonance. That is not a sign that you have failed. That is just the habit of the mind. It is a long-standing pattern that has served you in the past, even if it has cost you your peace. Do not judge yourself for being back in the habit. Simply notice the weight of the silver in your hand. Feel the tension in your fingers. And then, with the same gentleness you would offer a tired friend, set the fork on the floor. You can always start again. You can always look at the open air. You can always remember that you are the space, not the echo, and that the resonance that moves through you is the same resonance that moves through everything else, indifferent to whether your tempo is perfectly paced or whether you are simply, beautifully, humanly breathing. Take a breath and feel how your life opens up when you stop demanding that every thought be a masterwork of tempo. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your existence through your ability to maintain a pristine, prepared internal atmosphere. But the atmosphere was never the point. The point was the music that was growing while you were busy trying to manage it. You are here now. You are safe. The world is continuing its turning, and you are not required to hold the beat steady. You are only required to be present, to witness the shift, and to breathe with the quiet, steady rhythm of the mountain. This is not a task for tomorrow. This is the practice for this very moment, as you drift toward a rest that no longer needs to be earned, but only allowed. You have been carrying the weight of an audience for so long that you have forgotten how light you are without it. Every time you catch yourself performing, every time you catch yourself reviewing your notes to see if they were right, see if you can just smile at the reflex. It is a very human thing to want to be understood, but you do not need to be understood by everyone to be at peace. You only need to be honest with yourself. When you let go of the need for an external mirror, you find that the hall becomes much larger. It becomes a place where you can sit and do nothing, where you can think and let it pass, where you can feel and let it soften, without any of it ever being a final judgment on your worth. This is the freedom of a heart that has finally surrendered to the resonance of the room. It is the peace of knowing that you are already whole, and that the only thing you ever had to do was to stop managing the music for the life that is already unfolding. Stay in this awareness a little longer, feeling the air move through you, and know that you are finally beginning to see the way forward, one empty-handed, quiet beat at a time. The fork is gone, the pavilion is still, and you are left with nothing but the soft, shifting vibrations and the permission to let it all be exactly as it is. While you finally truly let go, the pavilion has settled into the deep, velvet silence that only descends when the musician finally understands that the air itself is waiting for the sound to resolve. You have spent your long, industrious hours believing that the integrity of your life was something you had to actively produce, something you had to strike, sustain, and protect with every ounce of your vigilance. But look now at how the valley breathes in the dark, how the notes you were so desperately trying to force into a sequence are simply dissolving into their natural, infinite, and beautiful space, how the instrument has grown cool and silent, and how the entire landscape has entered a state of profound, holy stillness. The tuning fork has been laid aside, and the melody you were so frantic to complete has already been released, woven into the very resonance of the night that is now carrying you toward your rest. Let your body mirror this descent, letting the muscles of your jaw, your shoulders, and your chest unravel into the dark, welcoming texture of your bed. You are no longer required to be the relentless composer of your own experience, and the tempo that pulsed through your hands all day is slowing to the pace of a steady, rhythmic tide. Feel the weight of your limbs as they become heavy, anchor-deep, and perfectly supported by the space you occupy. The cooling air in the room is not a draft to be sealed. It is the natural, refreshing breath of a world that is also learning how to slow down. Each breath you take is a small, quiet returning, a gentle movement away from the effort of the performance and back toward the safety of an existence that does not need to be conducted. There is a deep, ancient mercy in this, setting aside the way the valley understands that to be unplayed is not to be inadequate, but to be open. Your thoughts, those stray, vibrating echoes of your past performances, are drifting down like fine, silver dust in the shifting shadows, settling into the hollows where they can no longer demand your attention. You do not need to rake them up. You do not need to sort them into piles of dissonance or harmony. They are simply part of the architecture, and like the dust, they are returning to the silence, leaving your awareness clean, exposed, and ready for the deep, restorative quiet of the coming night. You are not losing your way by letting these things settle. You are finally uncovering the musician who was always present beneath the performance. Feel the heavy, velvet dark of this hour, how it wraps around you like the soft, unvarnished bamboo in the master's corner. Your awareness, which has been so focused on the horizon of your achievements, is now turning inward, settling into the vast, warm center of your own quiet heart. You don't need to listen for any further instruction. You don't need to analyze the geometry of your own piece. You can simply let yourself be a part of the pavilion, standing in the stillness, anchored in the truth that you are enough, exactly as you are, without a single finished phrase to your name. Every tension, every doubt, every lingering shadow of your self-correction is dissolving now, turning into the soft, dim light that promises nothing but the silence of a long, deep, and dreamless sleep. You are safe, you are held, you are home. Let the images of the mountain peaks, the cedar pillars, and the resonance of the valley fade away until there is no boundary between your breath and the profound stillness of the house. You are not drifting away from your reality. You are arriving at the place where the true composition of your life begins, undisturbed by the clock, the expectations of others, or the need to demonstrate your worth. The night is a vast, calm sanctuary, and you are a traveler who has finally set down the flute, settling into a rest that has been waiting for you since the sun first turned toward the mountain. Everything that needed to be played is left for tomorrow, and the valley will know how to wait, just as you will know how to find your way back to your own inner warmth. If the resonance you feared you were losing was only a rigid frame you were building to hide from the beauty of your own fluidity, what happens when you finally stop trying to pin the melody down and just allow yourself to be the silence that holds the room?